Chapter 1. The Cultural Exchange. The Intergalactic Academy was a hub of knowledge and unity between species from across the galaxy. It was a prestigious institution, a place where the brightest minds of hundreds of different alien races came together to learn from each other, all in the name of fostering peace and understanding between worlds. It was here that Kira Lin, a young, ambitious student from the Nixon race, found herself seated in the Academy's Grand Library, surrounded by data files on human biology and assignment she had eagerly volunteered for. Little did she know how much this topic would change her life. The Nixon race, known for their elegance and complex telepathic culture, had developed methods of bonding and reproduction that were vastly different from most races. For them, the act of reproduction was a deeply spiritual and mental experience. Their mating rituals were built around intricate dances, telepathic connection, and shared emotional energy. Nixon pairs would link their minds, souls, and bodies in a transcendental process that could last days, even weeks. But humans? Well, humans were far more simplistic, or at least that's what she had been told. Seated across from Kira Lin was her study partner, Daniel Matthews, a human male who had caught the attention of nearly every Nixon female in the Academy due to his casual confidence and warm smile. He wasn't particularly striking by Nixon standards, with his medium build, short brown hair, and unremarkable facial structure, but there was something about him that sparked curiosity. Daniel had been assigned as her partner for a cultural exchange program, one that involved exploring the intricacies of each other's species, an exciting prospect for the open-minded Kira Lin. "So, let me get this straight," Kira Lin began, her wide violet eyes narrowing in confusion as she scrolled through the human anatomy holoscreens. "You humans, you just connect physically? No mental bonding? No energy exchange?" Daniel, who was lounging in his chair, leaning back with a relaxed air about him, gave a half-smile. "Well, I wouldn't say it's just physical, but yeah, humans rely on a lot more physical interaction. We don't have that mental bond stuff like you guys." Kira Lin tilted her head, her tendrils shimmering in shades of blue as they reflected her perplexity. "How do you form a connection without merging minds? It seems so basic." Daniel chuckled, his deep voice reverberating through the quiet library. "I guess it would seem basic to you, but for us, there's more to it. Emotions, chemistry, attraction, all play a role. Physical touch is, well, it's intimate. It's how we express our feelings." Kira Lin blinked, still struggling to grasp the concept. For a Nixon, intimacy was sacred, something that took years of deep mental and spiritual connection to achieve. The idea of humans expressing such closeness through mere physical contact felt almost primitive. She couldn't help but wonder if there was something more to it, something she had yet to understand. As they continued their discussion, Kira Lin found herself growing more intrigued by the human way of bonding. Her curiosity got the best of her as she asked Daniel more personal questions about how humans approached relationships and affection. His candid responses made her feel strangely drawn to him, in a way she hadn't anticipated. There was an openness about Daniel, a warmth that contrasted the often reserved nature of her own people. And while she didn't fully understand human intimacy, she felt compelled to explore it further, if only for the sake of her research. "I still don't understand how you can feel truly connected with someone without sharing their thoughts and emotions directly," Kira Lin said, her voice laced with genuine curiosity. Daniel leaned forward, his eyes locking with hers in a way that sent a strange thrill down her spine. "You'd be surprised. Sometimes, the simplest forms of connection can be the most powerful. Maybe one day, you'll get to experience it for yourself." Kira Lin felt a sudden heat rise in her cheeks, an unusual reaction for her species, one she had never experienced before. She quickly diverted her gaze, pretending to focus on the holoscreens, but her mind was racing. What was it about humans that made them so different, and yet so fascinating? The study session ended, and as Kira Lin made her way back to her dormitory, her mind was consumed by thoughts of human intimacy. She knew it was all part of the cultural exchange, but something about it felt more personal now. There was an itch in her mind, a desire to understand what it was like to feel that kind of connection. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that Daniel had sparked something inside her, a curiosity she hadn't known existed. Back in her room, Kira Lin found herself pacing, her heart racing faster than normal. Nixons didn't experience emotions in the same erratic way humans did, but tonight was different. She felt restless, unsettled. The conversation with Daniel had left her with more questions than answers, and despite her attempts to clear her mind, his words lingered. What was it about human bonding that seemed so alluring, yet so alien to her? Could it really be as simple as physical touch and emotion? Her mind wandered further, imagining what it might be like to engage in such a connection. The very thought made her uncomfortable, but also undeniably curious. She shook her head, trying to dispel the strange thoughts, but they wouldn't leave. Kira decided she needed answers, and there was only one way to get them. She had to experience it for herself firsthand. But how? Could she truly subject herself to such an alien concept? The idea was risky, but that's what made it all the more intriguing. The next day, she would approach Daniel with an offer. An offer to experience the human method of bonding, for the sake of research, of course. There was no other reason. Or so she told herself. Chapter 2. The experiment begins. The following day, Kira found herself walking toward the academy courtyard, her heart hammering in her chest. She had never felt this level of nervousness before, but then again, she had never planned on asking anyone something so bold. Her Nixon upbringing had taught her to be measured and calm, but today, her curiosity had taken the reins. Daniel was leaning against one of the stone pillars outside, reading something on his wrist device. He didn't seem to notice her approach at first, which gave her a moment to gather her courage. This wasn't supposed to be difficult. She was a scientist, an academic. The request she was about to make was purely for research. She repeated this mantra in her head, but the more she thought about it, the less convinced she became. When she finally stood before him, Daniel looked up, smiling in that easy, friendly way that had become so familiar to her over the last few weeks. "Hey Kira, you ready for another round of cultural confusion?" Kira chuckled awkwardly, tucking a strand of her silvery blue hair behind one ear. "Actually, I have something to ask you. Something different." Daniel raised an eyebrow, intrigued by her sudden change in demeanor. "Different how?" Kira hesitated for a moment, her words caught in her throat. She could feel her mind racing, searching for the right way to phrase her request without making it sound strange. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she took a deep breath and spoke. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," she began, her voice quieter than usual, "about how humans bond. Physically." Daniel's expression shifted slightly, curiosity now replaced with a hint of surprise. "Oh, what about it?" Kira swallowed, feeling her pulse quicken. "I'd like to experience it. For the sake of research, of course." For a moment, there was silence. Daniel blinked, clearly processing what she had just said, before a slow, bemused smile spread across his face. "You want to experience it?" Kira nodded, her cheeks flushing a deep shade of violet. "Yes, I need to understand human intimacy from a first-hand perspective. I've learned all I can from reading and discussions, but it's not the same as experiencing it. So, would you help me?" Daniel looked at her, his smile faltering slightly as he gauged her sincerity. "You're serious?" "I am," Kira replied, her tone resolute. "I need this for my studies. I'm trying to understand how your species forms emotional connections without the mental and spiritual bonds my people have. It's purely scientific." Daniel chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I gotta say, I didn't expect this kind of request when I woke up this morning." Kira shifted awkwardly, her discomfort evident in the way her tendrils flickered nervously. "If you're not comfortable with it, I understand." No, Daniel said quickly, his smile returning. "It's not that. I'm just surprised, that's all. It's not every day an alien girl asks me to. Well, you know." Kira tendrils flared slightly, her embarrassment growing. "I apologize if my request is inappropriate. I merely thought dash." Daniel held up a hand, cutting her off. "It's fine, Kira. I get it. You're curious. And honestly, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little curious too." He paused, his expression softening as he looked at her. "But if we do this, I want to make sure you're comfortable with it. Human intimacy is, well, it's not just about physical contact. There's emotion involved too." Kira nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure what he meant by that. Emotions were something Nixons experienced in a more controlled, intellectual way. They didn't have the same intense, erratic feelings that humans seem to grapple with. But she was determined to understand, no matter what. "I'm ready," she said, more to convince herself than Daniel. Daniel's smile turned into something more genuine, and he nodded. "All right, let's take it slow, okay? We don't have to rush into anything." The two of them left the courtyard and headed to a more private setting, a quiet observation room in one of the Academy's research wings. The room was used for studying interspecies interactions, with soft lighting and comfortable seating perfect for what Carolyn had in mind. Her heart was still racing as they entered, and she found herself hyper-aware of every movement Daniel made, every breath he took. This was happening. She was about to experience something that no other Nixon had ever dared to try. Daniel sat down first, gesturing for her to join him. She hesitated for a moment, then sat next to him on the couch, her body tense with anticipation. She wasn't sure what to expect. Humans were so different from her people, their methods of bonding so foreign. But she had made up her mind. She was going to see this through, no matter how strange it felt. "So," Daniel began, his voice soft, almost cautious. "The first thing you should know is that humans rely a lot on touch. It's how we connect with each other on a physical level. I'm guessing your people don't do much of that?" Carolyn shook her head. "No. For us, touch is reserved for those we've formed deep mental bonds with. It's considered intimate." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. For humans, touch can be intimate too, but it's also a way to show affection, comfort, or even just friendliness. Here, let me show you." He reached out slowly, taking her hand in his. The warmth of his skin against hers was startling, and Carolyn tensed reflexively. Nixons were not used to casual physical contact, and the sensation was both alien and strangely pleasant. Daniel's grip was firm but gentle, his thumb lightly brushing the back of her hand. She felt an odd tingle travel up her arm, something she hadn't anticipated. "See?" Daniel said softly. "It's not so bad, right?" Carolyn nodded, her mind racing as she tried to process the sensation. "It's different. I can feel your energy, but it's not the same as a mental bond. It's more physical." Daniel smiled. "Exactly. And it's not just about the hand-holding. Humans also use other forms of touch to express emotions like hugs. For example, hugs?" Carolyn asked, her curiosity piqued. "It's when two people wrap their arms around each other," Daniel explained. "It's a way of showing care or comfort. Here, I can show you if you want." Carolyn hesitated, then nodded. "All right, show me." Daniel gently let go of her hand and scooted closer, carefully wrapping his arms around her in a loose, warm embrace. Carolyn stiffened at first, not used to being held like this, but as she felt the warmth of his body against hers, a strange sense of calm washed over her. It was unlike anything she had experienced before. There was no mental connection, no spiritual merging, just the simple act of being close to another person. Yet, it made her feel connected in a way she hadn't expected. As they sat there, Carolyn realized something important. Human intimacy wasn't just about physical contact, it was about vulnerability, about opening oneself up to another without the need for words or telepathic bonds. It was raw, unfiltered emotion, and for the first time, she understood why humans placed so much importance on it. But just as she began to relax into the embrace, something unexpected happened. Her vision blurred, her head feeling suddenly light. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. A strange warmth spread through her body, followed by an overwhelming wave of exhaustion. Before she knew it, everything went black. Chapter 3, Aftermath. When Carolyn awoke, the room was still. Her eyes fluttered open to the dim, ambient lighting of the research wing, and she felt an odd sensation in her body, an unfamiliar heaviness, as if she had just come out of a deep, disorienting sleep. For a moment, she was unsure where she was or what had happened. But then the events of the previous day came rushing back to her. The experiment, the human bonding, Daniel's touch. She bolted upright, her tendrils flaring in surprise as her violet eyes darted around the room, searching for Daniel. Her heart raced as she realized she had passed out during what was supposed to be a controlled, educational exchange. Her Nixon physiology, it seemed, had been overwhelmed by the simple act of human physical contact, something she had severely underestimated. "Whoa, easy there," came Daniel's voice from across the room. He stood near the observation window, looking at her with concern but also a hint of amusement. "You okay? You scared the hell out of me." Kiralyn blinked, still trying to shake off the lingering fog of unconsciousness. She nodded slowly, though her head was spinning with confusion. I think so. What happened? How long was I out?" "Not long," Daniel reassured her, walking over to sit beside her on the couch. "Maybe 10 minutes, 15 at most. You just passed out." Kiralyn groaned softly, running a hand through her silvery blue hair. This was mortifying. She had never lost consciousness like that before, not even during the most intense Nixon rituals. To faint from something as simple as a human embrace? What would the others say if they found out? Her reputation as a diligent, focused student could be ruined. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice filled with embarrassment. "I didn't mean for that to happen. I don't know why my body reacted like that." Daniel shrugged, his usual easygoing demeanor still intact. "No need to apologize. It happens. I guess your system wasn't ready for all that human touchy-feely stuff." He chuckled, but there was kindness in his tone. "Honestly, I wasn't expecting that reaction either." Kiralyn sighed, leaning back against the cushions, her mind racing. What had gone wrong? Was it her unfamiliarity with human intimacy? Or was it something deeper, something about her biology that couldn't handle the emotional energy behind their physical contact? She wasn't sure, but one thing was certain. She couldn't just leave it at this. She needed to understand what had caused her to react so dramatically. If not for her own peace of mind, then for the sake of her research. "I need to try again," she said suddenly, her voice more resolute than before. Daniel blinked, clearly surprised by her statement. "Wait, you want to try again? After what just happened?" Kiralyn nodded, sitting up straighter. "Yes. It's important for me to understand what went wrong. My reaction could be tied to something fundamental about my physiology, something that could help bridge the gap between our species. I can't just walk away from this without figuring it out." Daniel raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're really dedicated to this whole research thing, aren't you?" Kiralyn met his gaze, her expression serious. "I take my studies very seriously, Daniel. This is about more than just curiosity. It's about understanding how different species can connect on deeper levels. It's about finding common ground." For a moment, Daniel looked at her, and she could see the gears turning in his mind. Then, with a shrug, he leaned back and smiled. "All right, Kira, if you're up for it, I'm game. But let's take it slow this time, yeah? No passing out on me again." Kiralyn felt a small surge of relief at his willingness to continue, though part of her still felt uneasy. She couldn't explain why her body had reacted the way it did, but she knew that she needed to approach this experiment with caution. The human method of bonding might seem simple, but clearly, there were complexities beneath the surface ones she had underestimated. Taking a deep breath, Kiralyn turned to Daniel, her resolve solidifying. "Let's start over. From the beginning." Daniel nodded, his expression more serious now. "All right. First, we'll try something even more basic. How about we skip the physical stuff for a moment and just focus on talking? Sometimes, with humans, that's just as important as the touch." Kiralyn tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "Talking? You mean, just communicating with words?" Daniel smiled. "Yeah, you'd be surprised how much humans rely on conversation to build connections. We share our thoughts, our feelings. Sometimes just talking can be just as intimate as physical touch." Kiralyn considered this for a moment. Nixons communicated through telepathy when they formed deep bonds, and while they spoke verbally in social settings, their true emotional connections were almost always tied to the mental. The idea that humans could bond emotionally through spoken words alone was foreign to her, but after her recent experience, she wasn't about to dismiss it. "All right," she agreed. "Let's talk." For the next hour, they simply talked. Daniel asked her about Nixon culture, about her family back on her home planet of Visual, about the intricate mating dances she had mentioned before. In turn, Kiralyn asked about human relationships, how they navigated emotions, and what love meant to them. She listened intently as Daniel described the complexities of human affection, how it could be unpredictable, overwhelming, and beautiful all at once. As they spoke, Kiralyn realized something profound. For the first time, she began to understand the emotional depth behind human interactions. Though their methods were different from Nyx and telepathic bonds, humans formed connections through vulnerability, through the act of sharing pieces of themselves with one another. Their words carried emotion, and in that, there was a kind of intimacy that Kiralyn had never experienced before. She found herself growing more comfortable, more relaxed, as Daniel shared his stories. His easy laugh, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about his family, the moments of hesitation when he talked about things that made him vulnerable, it all made sense now. Human connection wasn't just physical. It was emotional, built on trust and shared experiences. And that, Kiralyn realized, was something she had overlooked. By the time they finished talking, Kiralyn felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. She hadn't passed out this time, hadn't felt overwhelmed. Instead, she felt a sense of connection that was unfamiliar but welcome. That wasn't so bad, was it? Daniel asked, his smile warm and genuine. Kiralyn smiled back, feeling a strange warmth in her chest. No, it wasn't. I think I understand now. Humans. You form connections through more than just physical touch. It's the sharing of emotions, of stories. Exactly, Daniel said, leaning back in his seat. And that's what makes it special. We may not have telepathy or energy bonds like your people, but we've got our own way of connecting. Kiralyn nodded, her mind buzzing with new thoughts. She had learned more about human intimacy in that hour than she had in weeks of studying. But there was still one more part of the experiment left, one more step she needed to take to fully understand the human experience. Daniel, she said softly, her gaze steady, I think I'm ready now. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. Are you sure? We don't have to rush into anything. I'm sure, Kiralyn replied, her voice firm. This time, I understand what I'm getting into. I won't pass out again. Daniel grinned. Well, let's hope not. Chapter 4. The Final Connection. Kiralyn and Daniel sat in silence for a moment after their extended conversation, the air between them now filled with a newfound understanding. Kiralyn felt something settle within her, something that had been missing before. The human way of connecting was so different from her own people's methods, but it had its own depth and richness. She had underestimated the power of simple words, the vulnerability that came with sharing thoughts and emotions through speech alone. But now, it was time to take the next step. The final piece of the puzzle remained, experiencing human physical intimacy. While their previous attempt had left her overwhelmed, she now felt more prepared. She understood, at least in part, why the human method of bonding was so powerful. It wasn't just about touch, it was about the feelings behind it, the unspoken emotions that connected two people. She took a deep breath and looked over at Daniel. He had been patient, kind, and respectful throughout this entire process, never pressuring her, always letting her take the lead. She appreciated that more than she could say, and now, she was ready. Okay, Kiralyn said softly, her violet eyes meeting his. I think I'm ready to try again. This time, for real. Daniel gave her a reassuring smile, though she could see the hint of nervousness in his eyes. All right, but remember, we don't have to rush into anything. We can stop at any time if you feel uncomfortable. Kiralyn nodded. I know, but I want to understand. I want to see this through. With a deep breath, she scooted closer to him on the couch, her heart thumping loudly in her chest. The room felt smaller now, more intimate, as if the space between them had shrunk to just a few inches. She could feel the warmth of his body beside hers, a heat that seemed to radiate from him, drawing her in. Slowly, Daniel raised his hand and placed it gently on her arm, just as he had done before. This time, Kiralyn didn't flinch. Instead, she focused on the sensation, the warmth of his skin against hers, the light pressure of his fingers. It was strange, but not unpleasant. In fact, it felt comforting, grounding. She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on her breathing. She could feel her heart racing, but she was determined not to let it overwhelm her. This was part of the human experience, and she wanted to embrace it fully. Are you okay? Daniel's voice was soft, barely above a whisper. Kiralyn opened her eyes and nodded. Yes, I'm all right. Daniel smiled again, his eyes warm and reassuring. Good. Just tell me if you need to stop. I will, she promised. Then, without another word, Daniel leaned in slightly, his hand still resting on her arm. The closeness between them sent a strange, fluttering sensation through Kirilen's chest, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into it, letting herself feel the connection between them. The next step came naturally, though it still surprised her. Daniel gently wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her into a loose embrace. This time, Kirilin didn't tense up. She allowed herself to relax into his touch, resting her head against his shoulder. The sensation was soothing. There was no mental bond, no merging of thoughts, but there was something else, a quiet, wordless connection that existed in the simple act of being close to another person. For a while, they just sat there in silence, the soft hum of the room's atmosphere the only sound. Kirilin focused on her breathing, on the rhythm of Daniel's heartbeat beneath her ear. She had never experienced anything like this before. It wasn't telepathic, it wasn't spiritual, but it was intimate in a way she hadn't expected. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked after a while, his voice a gentle murmur. Kirilin smiled faintly, her eyes still closed. "I feel calm, connected." "That's good," Daniel said, his voice full of warmth. They stayed like that for several minutes, just holding each other. No words necessary. Kirilin found herself sinking deeper into the embrace, her body relaxing more with each passing moment. It was strange how something as simple as touch could evoke such powerful emotions. She could feel Daniel's steady presence beside her, his warmth surrounding her like a protective shield. It was comforting in a way she hadn't expected. Eventually, Daniel shifted slightly, pulling back just enough to look at her. "Are you still feeling okay?" Kirilin opened her eyes and nodded. "Yes, I think. I understand now. Human intimacy isn't just about the physical. It's about the emotions behind it, the connection that forms through shared experiences." Daniel smiled, clearly pleased with her realization. "Exactly. It's about trust, vulnerability, and letting yourself be close to someone." Kirilin nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction settle over her. She had come into this experiment thinking it would be purely scientific, that she would observe and analyze the human method of bonding from a detached, objective standpoint. But now, she realized it was impossible to do that. Human intimacy wasn't something you could study from a distance. It had to be experienced, felt on a personal level. And she had felt it. The connection between them wasn't telepathic, wasn't based on energy, but it was real. It was built on trust, on the willingness to open up to someone else, even if that meant being vulnerable. For the first time, Kirilin truly understood what it meant to connect with another being, not just on a mental or spiritual level, but on an emotional one. "I think this is enough for today," Kirilin said softly, her voice steady but tired. "I've learned a lot." Daniel nodded, releasing her gently from the embrace. "I'm glad I could help. I hope this wasn't too overwhelming for you." "It was. Intense," Kirilin admitted, smiling faintly, "but in a good way. I've gained a deeper understanding of human connection than I ever thought possible." Daniel stood up, offering her a hand to help her off the couch. Kirilin accepted it, her fingers wrapping around his. The simple gesture felt more meaningful now, after everything they had shared. "So," Daniel said, his tone light, "does this mean I get an A+ in Alien Cultural Studies?" Kirilin laughed softly, her tendrils flickering with amusement. "You've certainly earned high marks, but there's still so much more to learn." "Well," Daniel replied, giving her a playful grin, "I'm always up for more lessons if you are." Kirilin felt a warmth bloom in her chest at his words. She had started this journey out of curiosity, driven by her desire to understand human biology and bonding. But now, it was more than that. She had formed a genuine connection with Daniel, one that went beyond scientific study. It was personal. And while there were still many things she didn't fully understand, she knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. As they left the research room together, walking side by side through the Academy's halls, Kirilin couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement for what the future held. There was so much more to explore, so much more to discover both about human intimacy and about her own capacity for connection. And she was ready for it.